Detroit has a new police chief, at least for a while. We'll talk to James White about priorities at a critical time in the nation's police departments. Meanwhile, did his predecessor leave office to run for governor? We'll check the Michigan political landscape where there are burning issues everywhere. Today is Sunday, June 6, 2021, and this is Flashpoint. Hi there, welcome to Flashpoint. We missed you last week thanks to the schedule shuffle brought about by the Indy 500, and we're going to miss you next week due to the French Open, so we've got a lot to get to this morning. We're going to start with the change at the Detroit Police Department. James Craig has turned in his badge. We'll see if he trades it for a campaign button. But in the meantime, with an intense spotlight trained on American law enforcement, James White gets the nod as the interim chief as the search for a permanent chief gets underway. I suppose congratulations are in order for Chief White. And yet he's taking on a job that has to withstand demands even from his local congresswoman to defund or even dismantle the police. It comes with gun violence spraying forth on a nightly basis in the city, and drag racers and drifters have decided the streets are theirs. What does James White have in mind? We're going to talk with the new chief in just a minute. We also need to catch up on some bread and butter politics. Thanks to Craig's musings about a candidacy, the governor's race is clearly getting early attention, and there's a Detroit mayoral race that is about to intensify too. All happening while the new redistricting commission is at work, and I don't know one Michigan political watcher who has the slightest clue as to exactly what they're going to deliver. It's all coming up too today on Flashpoint. Mayor Duggan's choice for a new interim police chief in Detroit doesn't need a tour of the headquarters or directions to the bathroom. He knows the place very well, having served as deputy chief for years before leaving to run the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. That seems an interesting intersection, doesn't it, given the intense focus on the intersection of policing and civil rights right now. Very good to have interim chief James White with us today on Flashpoint. Chief, I appreciate your time. You said right out of the gate that you had no intention of trying to be James Craig. I know that was not a dig at James Craig. Explain what you meant.
No, not a dig at all. James Craig is probably one of the most popular chiefs in my career with the Detroit Police Department. He arrived at a time where he was clearly the best chief we've had at the right time in the department's history. So, you know, to try to fill his shoes is not really something that I've got my desire to do. I mean, I think that I need to learn from the chief some of the things that he did in the organization at a time when we needed the leadership that we received. But to try to impersonate James Craig is just not that I think is advisable.
You know, for all of his popularity, and clearly I think a lot of people felt there was terrific leadership, especially last summer of the department, but he leaves office at a time when there is this massive spike in gun violence all over a lot of American big cities, including the city of Detroit. What do we do to get a handle on it?
Yeah, it's an unprecedented time in history. Certainly, like you've indicated, Devin, around the country right now, we're seeing a spike in violence, particularly gun violence. Here in Detroit, we've seen our increase as well. Gun violence is everywhere. We have to focus, redouble our efforts, put boots on the ground. Certainly, everyone who can patrol needs to patrol, engage the community. There are areas in our community where the spikes are a little higher than other areas. So we certainly have to make sure that we are not only out in force, because you're not going to be able to arrest your way out of this problem, but it's going to require some community engagement. It's going to require knowing what some of the problems are, some of the hot spots, and truly engaging our community.
Chief Craig never really enjoyed talk about fewer guns. He's a pretty full-throated supporter of the Second Amendment. I know a lot of people, you must hear from all the time, from people telling you that there's just too many guns around. Do you part ways with Chief Craig on that at all?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a part ways. I think two things can be true at once. You can have support of the Second Amendment, but at the same time, responsible gun ownership, safety is paramount. I mean, we can't have the situations that we're seeing now. We can't have people attempting to resolve disputes with using weapons. I mean, you've got simple arguments that are resulting in gunplay. The unfortunate circumstance a few weeks ago, a young lady and getting gas at a gas station, and two people have some conflict, and they get in, exchange of gunfire. and this 18-year-old is struck and killed. I mean, that's absolutely unacceptable. I mean, that's horrible. This young girl will not get an opportunity to go to college, get married, have a life by virtue of stopping and fueling up at a local gas station. So I don't have a problem with responsible gun ownership. I have a problem when people decide to use a weapon to resolve a very simple dispute.
We have, as a part of the city that you now will have to police, is represented by a congresswoman who has famously said that we need to get rid of policing, we need to get rid of mass incarceration. You just left a position where I know across your desk almost every day you were reading complaints from people who felt that they'd been handled inappropriately or even criminally by police. Tell me a little bit about what you hear and what you intend to do about those who say we need to defund police.
Well, let me start by saying I don't support defunding the police. We have a great relationship with our community here in Detroit. We have to simply assist the police and add components to policing to ensure that the police are put in the best position to be successful. Now, that's not to say that I don't support reforms. I mean, reforms are necessary. Anyone who thinks that they're simply not paying attention to some of the issues that are trending around this country. It's certainly what culminated last year with the tragic murdering of Mr. Floyd speaks volumes to where we are as a society. So to say that reforms aren't necessary is not an appropriate comment. But I think reforms are specific to the community in which you're serving. Reform is not a broad brush approach. When I was at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, having retired from Detroit Police Department as an assistant chief, I spent a lot of years working with our consent judgment, 11 years in fact, and we were able to build model policy in the Detroit Police Department, and model policy being policy that is best practice compared to other agencies around the corner or around the country. And what's important with that is if you have an agency that is progressive, that has model policy, and that holds this agency accountable, you're able to responsibly police a community. Now, if a situation arises where you get it wrong or something happens or there's a problem in a policing agency, you hold the officers accountable. Yeah. I mean, you certainly have to support the officers. You have to get out front and make sure that the officers are supported and upright. But equally as important is the idea that when something is wrong or something goes wrong, that you get out front and that you're transparent with the community. So when we talk about, defunding the police, I think what we need to do is really define that as what we're talking about. Certainly there are times where we can have situations where policing needs to expand how it does its work. We have a tremendous issue with mental illness in our country. Yep. Detroit is not unlike any other major city. We know that we've lost 16 mental health facilities in the state of Michigan in the past 15 years or a little bit longer. What happens to those needs? Those needs don't go away because the facilities aren't there to support them.
Well, in fact, Chief, you and your officers are the front line of mental health too often, absolutely. Mental health service. What do you do about that? Absolutely.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, the late Benny Napoleon and I talked a few years back about mental illness in incarceration, and he was telling me that over 70% at the time that we talked of the people that he had in the county jail had some form of mental illness nexus. Yeah. And it's not necessarily being treated, which is why they are interacting with the police at a higher level. I'm happy to say here in Detroit, we have implemented a CIT program. I'm hoping to grow that program, expand that program. But getting back to your question, I think there are so many different components to what makes for a successful police department. You can't do it without community. You absolutely should not do it without community. You can't do it without responsibility, and you can't do it without transparency. And I think that those are really the foundation or the building blocks to a successful policing organization. When you talk about reduction of gun violence, it's the police are one part of that. The community is another part of that. You have to have responsible gun ownership, which includes securing weapons. You can't have weapons falling into the hands of criminals and criminal predators, and you can't resolve conflict with weapons. So yeah. We're going to have boots on the ground. We're going to focus We're going to identify these hot spots, and we're going to do so constitutionally, and we're going to do so responsibly. But at the same time, we're going to hold people accountable who are victimizing our community.
Well, I want to let you weigh in on a piece of technology that many people feel is almost by definition inappropriate in the way that it works, especially against people of color, and that's facial recognition technology. The Detroit Department was even a part of the 60 Minutes investigation on this a couple of weeks ago, so there's a lot of attention on it. How do you feel about this technology?
Well, I think the technology, if used responsibly, can be a valuable tool for law enforcement. But again, it comes back to responsible use of the equipment. You have to have policy in place, you have to have accountability, and you have to have trained experts, which we do here in Detroit, to use it. And you also have to have some parameters for its use. You can't have random facial recognitions observations taking place, which Detroit doesn't. What Detroit has and what we have here is specific crimes that we will use the technology to attempt to identify a predator or a criminal. But we're not using this tool indiscriminately. We're not using the tool irresponsibly. And we have people here that have been trained, have received the highest level of training. And then there has to be a process in place to check their work. So there has to be peer review in the process. And you have to have policy that holds the user accountable if there is an error. But I think that if used responsibly, the tool is a very valuable tool, should not be used indiscriminately. Here in Detroit, it's used for specific high-profile crimes, violent crimes, and the like, but not indiscriminately for misdemeanors and lesser crimes.
I probably don't need to ask you this. You would like to continue to be the police chief. You'd like the job on a permanent basis, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, okay. I would love to be the police chief for many years to come for the Detroit Police Department and for the citizens of this great city. But I'm not going to get distracted worrying about a process. Sure. I've got crime to fight. It's 90 degrees for the next 3 days. You know, we're all emerging from this COVID situation, and we're starting to stretch out a little bit. We want people to safely enjoy our community. But I'm not going to focus on what's going to happen with the process that I can't control. I'll be there to interview, but we'll let the chips fall where they may. I'm going to focus on this crime reduction. I'm going to target this gun violence, and we're going to see if we can do something about this illegal drag racing in the community. That's a massive problem, too. People are out of patience on that. Chief, so good to have you on Flashpoint for the first time. I hope not the last time. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care. Yes, sir. Thank you, Devin. Have a good day. You got it. Interim Chief James White will continue next on Flashpoint with our political roundtable. Don't go away.